Mothership. Oh, hello, didn't see you in the airlock there. I'm Cameron Dangerstrid Matter, host and warden of the Panic Table, and this is our first ever episode of Mission Control, where we take a deep dive into our favorite modules, missions, maps, and monsters in the indie TTRPG space. This season, we're focusing on modules for Mothership, the single most electrifying sci-fi horror RPG ever created. Why? Because we love it. Have any publishers paid us to do this? No. What are you, a cop? That said, consider joining the rest of our ragtag crew manifest. Support the Panic Table by subscribing, checking out our Patreon, and joining the Discord. All of these things and more are down in the description. Check it out. That's enough from me. Let's give a healthy Mission Control howdy to the one and only Joel Hines, mastermind behind Silverarm Press and publisher of works for Mothership, Old School Essentials, and more. Welcome to Mission Control, Joel.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the hat and the coffee. It's very good to be here.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Where are you calling in from?
Yeah, right now I'm calling in from Carson City, Nevada. I'm visiting my folks down here, and it's been good to catch up with everybody.
If you're playing Mothership and have a hankering to check out modules from third-party publishers, Joel's work almost always appears near the top of the list, with titles like Abilities Considered Unnatural, Astral Brews, A Fistful of Spore Pods, and more. None is more popular than the crown jewel in Silverarm's Cowboy tiara, the open sandbox, quite literally, the Desert Moon of Karth. All of that, and Senior Hines is a part-time park ranger. Joel, explain yourself.
Yeah, no, I've done 5 seasons for the National Park Service at different parks, and I've really enjoyed the work a lot. It's got a lot of pros, it's got a couple cons, but you really get to be out there in some beautiful places and show people interesting things about history, geology, wildlife, everything. And you wear a hat as well, which, nothing wrong with a good hat.
What was it that first drew you to the call of being a park ranger?
Really liked getting outdoors, like backpacking, hiking throughout sort of high school into college. One of my majors was in environmental policy decision making, so that was relevant as well. And I just got really lucky. I applied to Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado. A really beautiful place, looks like Tatooine if you're in the middle of it.
Can you tell us how Karth came to be?
I was working at a space camp, basically for kids in the mountains above LA. And then they said, hey, there's this sickness going around. We're just going to pause for 2 weeks and then we're going to come back. Everything's going to be fine. Well, as everybody who was around knows that 2 weeks turned into much, much longer. And so I spent a lot of time on the internet, like a lot of folks during COVID. And luckily, I got into, I was really into RPGs, and I got into like the Mothership scene and old school Renaissance type stuff and other like indie RPGs. And I saw a lot of people were making really cool stuff. And it turns out it's pretty accessible to make cool stuff. And I figured I could give it a shot. So I like sandbox environments, places where it's location-based adventure design, where you have this situation or scenario. Through the interactions of the players, the adventure is sort of emerges or organically, I guess, and the play is sort of the story. And so as I was designing that, I had a lot of like great influences from different role-playing games, modules, but also Dune I thought was really cool. Also Firefly, Dark Tower, Cowboy Bebop, a little bit of Star Wars in there too, hard to avoid. I just took this medley, and if you're really into something and you mix all those things together, then you're going to make something that's unique and hopefully good if you're excited about it. I spent upfront like something like $3,000 on like art and layout and such, and this could have been a very bad idea. Like it was. I would not recommend anybody do that for their first zine when they're unemployed at their parents' house. Not my number one recommendation.
Well,
but
and
I
hold
really,
the phone here.
Yeah.
Desert Moon of Karth was your first endeavor into publishing?
Yes, it was. I'd never
wild.
done it before, and the Kickstarter did rather well. It was over $21,000, 1,400 backers. I was really blown away by that, and it got me thinking maybe I could turn this into a career And at this point, I've sort of moved into through several other projects, doing this full time and moving away from actually doing seasonal park ranger work. Although if everything falls apart, I'll be try to throw the hat back on and move out into the woods and run away from everything.
It's always option 2, I think. No matter what you're doing, you can always simply pull on your duster and stride off into the sunset, never to be seen again. And that's one of the comforts of Mother Nature, is that she'll swallow you whole. Let's talk about Karth specifically. Literally Karth. Yeah. What a name. How'd you get there?
I think the sort of naming framework comes from like Forest Moon of Endor. I really like that sort of that's a wild sort of retro sound, and it's like it is unclear if it's like, is the moon the Endor or is it the Forest Moon of Endor? And I don't even know what the actual case is. Get the Star Wars people on it. But anyway, I like that sort of that naming convention, and I wanted something that would sort of roll off the tongue well. And Karth, it's got like a nice mouthfeel to it, I guess is the best I can give you, like a car or like a
car,
some hard sounds to it.
Karth.
Yeah.
The air smells like cardamom?
Mm-hmm.
What's with that?
Well, it smells like a different spice in Dune, and I didn't want it to smell like that, but I really like the idea of a pleasant aroma that you wouldn't expect, I guess, necessarily. And that might come from the chunks of coral that are fossilized, sort of mixed and throughout the sediment and sand of Karth. I think it's just introducing like dissonant elements, making it as weird as possible without being too weird to be relatable is the sort of line I try to walk. Doing silly things and then taking them seriously, I think, is important to the way I design things.
I think that that's indispensable information. I would say one of the biggest obstacles that I see just from first-time wardens or people just getting into Mothership and similar systems is that they walk into something labeled sci-fi horror and then immediately start asking, why isn't it scary? Or how do I ramp up the horror? And it's because they're chasing this thing behind a door that the second you reveal it, oh no, sand squid, or the ghoul from space, then the cat's out of the bag and everybody knows. But the quotient weirdness of a desolate landscape with air that you can't quite place the scent of, and strangers who are hostile but accommodating at the same time, and the general pressure of the feeling that you just can't leave for a number of factors is such an amazing cocktail you've blended to create a setting that on its own is deeply unsettling. In our show, The Panic Table, one of our characters is the head of security, Lieutenant Chance Bonchance, who actually comes from the Tide World, and in his ship he has cardamom scented candles, and that's just it's the deepest track that I expected nobody to pick up on. But these kids, spoiler alert, steal his spaceship at one point because he's the only person on this asteroid colony with a fighter jet. And so they get in there and they're like, there's scented candles, what the hell are these doing here? And they all just are there to remind him of home.
First time on a ship?
First time in a ship like this. I've never seen just open flame candles on a spaceship.
The ship's wild. Chance is crazy.
That's awesome. I'm glad really cool. We can get this candle sense out there in the universe.
All we know is that somehow Chance figured out how to get out of Karth, which is a very, very difficult thing to do once you're there. You have this amazing epigraph at the beginning of the module, which we'll just put right here. Riffing off of what I just said about building an environment that lends itself to horror, can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to include this quote and more about effectively telling a terrifying story through world building the way you've done?
Yeah, sure. So I was trying to find a lot of great quotes about like isolation or the desert or this sort of strangeness you find out there. And this one really stuck with me. One sits down on a desert sand dune, sees nothing, hears nothing, yet through the silence something throbs and gleams. And I think that really that idea of emptiness that is covering something big and something hidden, I guess, really like under the surface, really vibe well with Karth. And maybe that something throbbing and gleaming is a sand squid, maybe it's some relic of a ancient civilization, maybe it's an interesting clue or awful horror that's just right under the surface. I like that sort of idea of what you see and initially and then what you discover or can find.
So you've done this magnificent thing that in 50-ish pages, you've given concrete touch points for all sorts of adventures, discoveries, and horrors on this desert moon, but you've left so much undiscovered. In a game system like Mothership that deeply encourages to play both fast, loose, and creatively, the edges of the map are all blurry and lend themselves to this ominous sense that even if you play through everything you've written, you've only just brushed the surface of what's going on this weird moon. And I think that that's absolutely tantalizing. I'm reminded of this clip from Lawrence of Arabia.
What is it, Major Lawrence, that attracts you personally to the desert? It's clean.
Clean.
I'm glad you picked up on some of those vibes and impressions from it. You were mentioning like horror and like maintaining that intensity. Desert Moon of Karth is not that scary. Sure, there is horrific elements under the surface, and there's a couple areas that are definitely very suitable for a quite spooky, terrifying campaign. But if you look at most Mothership modules and the source material that Mothership is drawing from, they're a lot scarier. But I think for campaign play though, and that roller coaster, is that it's nice to have things that are not completely 211 terrifying, to make those things that are 211 terrifying sort of more powerful and scary in comparison, and having that sort of distinction. It's nice if you're having that long arc with characters to have like things that are like, okay, this is just a little risky, or this is a little scary, or there's some peril here, but I'm not like being chased by flesh beasts 24/7 who are trying to, rip out my eyeballs and eat them. Like, sure, maybe a little bit of that. And that isn't to say that's a bad thing at all. It's just if you're going to have a long form campaign, then it's nice to have that different areas of experience, in my opinion.
And it gives the rare opportunity for the Mothership player to have an experience with characters that evolves over time and lends itself to true character growth, which is a cool thing if they manage to survive session to session. That once you get to Karth, there's not a quick ticket out. You're not 5 space truckers on a space bus with a single alien. You're among thousands of people, none of whom want to be on this massive desert moon. You build such a nice timeline for optimism to slowly die. And I think that that's a really magnificent engine to build a campaign around, is the developments that more or less lead them to conclude that either only at great personal ethical sacrifice or direct personal sacrifice will they either be able to escape or enable people that they view more worthy of escape to get off this rock. And that is a magical and very metal thing that you've done simultaneously. Big fan. Who's your favorite NPC?
On Karth, if I had to pick a favorite NPC, Lisa Krieg might be one of them. She's up there, just as sort of a unassociated person who has her little ranch out there, and then her drama with her husband who's in a cryopod. I enjoy that as an outlier. I like the ones that sort of the contrasts from like unusual people and those who are different than the other NPCs, I guess.
So of the 3 notable factions, you've got the mercenaries, the vigilant park rangers, and you have these dawn seekers, and you even provide this excellent graph of who feels what about whom at any given time. That's very useful, and you leave flexibility for those dispositions to change over time based on events, which is just bananas. Big fan of that. But what I love most is that you ask the wardens and or players to look at characters like the dawn seekers, these like semi-vampiric. I am always reminded of the Skeksis from the Dark Crystal insofar as their ambitions go, with their hideous tower of eldritch material, but yet you ask them to look at these youth-seeking ethereal beings as former people, and to explore them as post-humans with human ambitions. And that, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that sort of comes to my philosophy on horror as well. As similar is that like I find it To me, I like things that have a little bit of everything in them. And for NPCs, I think if there is someone who is, and this is a spectrum, but if there's someone who's entirely 100% the good guy with no like random like sub interests they have or nuances, or someone who's like, I am the bad guy and I do bad guy things, like I find that boring. And I think treating them as like nuanced people who want things and fear things just provides some scaffolding for game masters or wardens to go off of. And I think feels less heavy-handed because players in role-playing games, the magical thing is that they can do anything. When you're playing a video game that has faction play, there's sometimes it's very clear being the bad guy will have the bad results. And I find that type of, I guess, bias a little paternalistic. Not that I think players need to be murder hobos or nihilists with no, attachments to morality, but I don't think it's my job to, tell them the right course of action, even subtly through like, trying to have a clear good guy faction, bad guy faction. People want things and people are complicated, or things that are sort of like people also are complicated. I trust that players and wardens can have like a good time if you trust them to handle that type of nuance. And, that's not for everybody. Like some people really enjoy games that are clear cut, and that's fine as well. But my style of play, I like keeping that open and just having every table have a different experience, and all those experiences being legitimate, no matter who they're trying to work with or ruin. Either way.
Out there in the wilderness, as you're describing, it truly is the Wild West. And it has this wonderful blood meridian feeling of, like, my favorite part is finding when our players are suddenly stuck in a position where they realize, oh, I don't know if I can do anything that's loving and kind right now. There's not a good guy Bethesda option. There's just bad decisions, some of which are less bad, and suddenly they're in that standoff, good, bad, and the ugly style. And that is such a rewarding encounter. There's a soundtrack.
Yeah, so I don't recall where I got the idea from initially. I think there's some other RPG modules that had done it. But my brother, Eric, he's got a particular style that I enjoy. Also, a couple other people, like his friend Kevin Gunlack, worked on the other tracks, and he's great at sort of mixing sounds. And my friend Maddie, she did the ballad of Lars Tanaka at the beginning too. And so I just, I got to work with people I knew. And it turns out like a lot of people have been enjoying the soundtrack, which doesn't surprise me that much. But like, Eric's just like, I don't know why people are, why would people listen to RPG music, but it sets a vibe. And yeah, they ran an audio cassette of it. Somebody approached me for that, which is wild because I don't have a cassette player, but...
Joel, part of the pride of Mission Control is that we've prepared for every contingency, including 1980 style tape recorders. And never leave home without a cassette version of the Desert Moon of Karth soundtrack. That's what I always say. Let's give the old girl a listen.
That's that type of retro futurism time machine that I think Mothership and a lot of sci-fi RPG stuff sort of trucks in.
Moody. Atmospheric. Do you know I got this for like 12 bucks?
No sooner did St. Hades
It's not what the show's about.
then something rumbled
Yeah.
underneath.
Let's say you've tuned in for the first time to learn about what the heck Mothership is in the first place and have discovered this module. Do you need to own Mothership to start playing the Desert Moon of Karth? I've noticed that inside the module itself, you include these fabulous and slightly tweaked character sheets.
Yeah, I'd say having like the rules would help you out a lot. Luckily, they're available free online as well, or you can get the printable one. I think it helps having that base system. And if you're not playing exactly by the rules, like that's fine. You'll figure out. It'll be close enough. But yeah, Karth doesn't have a self-contained sort of custom rule set.
But it does have custom tweaks to the relatively lightweight Mothership rule set. Would you mind just touching on those for a second on your character sheets? I noticed that you added a lot of flavor, a little bit of spice to what Karth brings to the table, even from character creation.
Yeah, I was suggested to add, when I was working on the custom character sheets and with some people, to add some custom skills that sort of fit Karth to sort of set the scene. I believe I called it debauchery or So, that's a skill, and you could roll that to see how well you party, if you're able to handle your liquor, who knows, like if people think you're cool. And then also dueling is a big one in Karth, which sort of fits that a spaghetti western element to it. And I had some custom rules there to have that type of intense, like who's first on the draw, all or nothing type cinematic showdowns. And I also had a skill dying that I introduced. And people keep asking, what does that mean? But really, it's open-ended. Like, it's a pretty wild skill to have. And what is it to be good at dying? I just thought it was neat to include.
I think that's just a great question for people to consider, period.
Yeah. That's
how
a
does
big
one
question.
die well in this world or at their table is something that I think is another precious element of why I'm personally drawn to horror gameplay, because it compels you to consider things that matter more fundamentally at times. Of just, like when the chips are down, who am I? What matters to me? How can I express that in a way that brings delight to a table of friends? And enunciate those things in a way that a world without sand squids is just harder to do.
You can lose everything, and it is in spite of that. I was saying there's a cool blog post that refers to like RPGs as emotional gambling. If you have a character you care about, it's tempting to play where like, okay, nothing bad's gonna happen.
Bumpers.
Yeah, having the bumper. And that's completely legitimate, right? There's no wrong way to have fun. But for me, I think they are more precious and sort of realized and connected and enjoyable to me when I know all of that could be taken away at any second. Much like us, right? Like we are just ethereal beings who are here one day and then not the next, and that doesn't make it less valuable, right? In fact, and to me, that makes it more valuable. And in RPGs that emulate that as like weird little people who might just get eaten by a sand squid, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't care about these weird little people and be like, oh yeah, this is just my pawn, my little piece I move around. Like this could be a person you invest emotional energy in, and if they die, well, that can suck, but that's part of the experience, and that suck isn't necessarily a bad thing.
One of my favorite things, and half the reason we're having you on, which it is an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us, Joel.
I'm glad I could make it out to the studio today.
One of my favorite things about your work, whether it is things you've written or that your imprint is publishing itself, is that you have this marvelous eye for the numinous, this spiritual underbelly to the settings that you set forth. And so you get to encounter things that on their surface are already horrifying, whether that's bleak desert landscapes in the Desert Moon of Karth, or the unforgiving, crushing heel of the company and abilities considered unnatural. There's something other that, to me, raises content like this to the next level and allows for a more meaningful experience at the table with your colleagues. What does the role of an apocalypse, conceptually speaking and literally, play into the works that you have either written yourself or are now publishing? Because it seems like it's one of the strongest elements, is this idea of an end game that's just on the horizon.
Yeah, I think Apocalypse is really valuable to adventure because it's this idea of like right now in modern society, a lot of places, there's sort of a high degree of order and control, I guess. And these things have some benefits. They also have a lot of cons, but also for adventure, in terms of when we think about adventure gaming, characters sort of exist in these spaces of openness, which don't really exist in a controlled, functional society as much. And so when you wipe the slate clean, be it an apocalypse of some kind, which is 99% of every fantasy setting is apocalyptic. There's this great blog post that gets into this as well called the OSR Aesthetics of Ruin. And it's which mirrors some of my ideas on how basically you have more possibility space when there's less control and less sort of a central power that tells you what you can and can't do. So I think an apocalypse just is wiping open a space for adventure and danger and opportunity for a bunch of weird people to get up to shenanigans. There is a sense of darkness there too. There is a loss and there is danger and there is risk. But on the other hand, there is hope and there's the ability to change that in a way you want. And I like things being very bad, but having the opportunity to get better in whatever better is for the people playing the game.
I want to, in the last few minutes remaining, touch on something I'm very excited about introducing, which is a segment of the show we're referring to as Appendix N, the content that brought us to consider bringing things like the Desert Moon of Karth into being in the first place. And so, to that end, I've asked Joel to arrange for several pieces of artwork that inspired him personally to bring the Desert Moon to his audience. The first thing you brought up to us was just this picture of Clint Eastwood. What's going on?
I mean,
there?
Look at the picture. It's just such a cool fit. And, this is very embarrassing. I'd seen other Sergio Leone movies, but I had not seen Good, the Bad, and the Ugly until earlier this year, well after I made Karth. But I saw this image a lot earlier. And, it turns out the movie, I probably would have made Karth better if I had watched that one in addition to the other spaghetti westerns, obviously. It just looks cool. And I'm from Nevada originally, so there's definitely some cowboy adjacent stuff that I've marinated in for years. I also, I've moved to Granada in Spain. I'm trying to be there full time now. And that's where they filmed all of those movies as well. There's a lot of, a connection to cowboy adjacent stuff, this sort of fictionalized West, right? That I think Clint Eastwood in this picture really exemplifies here. And also just looks cool.
Two, you provided this amazing quote from Stephen King's The Dark Tower. Can you talk about what made you choose this as an influential piece of the puzzle?
So it's similar, definitely Stephen King's influence, one of his influences is spaghetti westerns as well in terms of The Dark Tower, but through a different lens where he's bringing his personal melange of influences as well. And I just think it's such a powerful opening because it really sets the scene in this one paragraph, like, this is what's going on. Here's this awful desert environment. And it also, I think, has that like idea of this sort of legendary fictionalized West, whatever that is, of this sort of this open, dangerous possibility space, which, historically, not the case at all versus like what we see in like the cinematic appearance of it, right? But there is a lot of power in those fantasies, I think. And as like D&D, for example, a lot of the sort of setting for it was based on this sort of the Western. A lot of the sort of tropes and the way the game works is based on that. And in The Dark Tower, I think that sort of cross-genre mixture that goes on also helped inspire Karth and other stuff that I've done as well. And then just throw in whatever you want in there and not caring if it would naturally be there, and then trying to work in the strange ingresses into your world into a way that is enjoyable and makes sense, and there is some connection, even if you throw some really weird stuff in there, which you wouldn't think should go. Actually, it is like a peanut butter and chocolate, or can be, crossing genres and mixing science fiction and fantasy and horror all together.
There's something special about the desert in that there is a deathliness that is always just within reach in a way that is clarified, that isn't perhaps as obviously apparent in day-to-day life in suburbia, on a space station, etc. You can just look out across rolling dunes and have this idea that something just past the horizon is coming, and that death is just around the bend in a very tangible way, as well as we've touched on at multiple points, spiritually or in some sort of ethereal manner, that it's just shadowing the horizon. And who used that paintbrush better than the filmmakers behind Conan the Frickin' Barbarian?
You killed my mother. You killed my father. You killed my people. You took my father's sword. It must have been when I was younger. There was a time, boy, when I searched for steel. And steel meant more to me than gold or jewels. The riddle of steel. Yes. You know what it is, don't you, boy? Shall I tell you? It's the least I can do. Steel isn't strong, boy. Flesh is stronger. Look around you. There, on the rocks. That beautiful girl. Come to me, my child. That is strength, boy. That is power. The strength and power of flesh. What is steel compared to the hand that wields it? Look at the strength of your body, the desire in your heart. I gave you this. Such a waste. Contemplate this on the tree of woe. Crucify him.
Joel, what were you thinking? Why this clip?
Yeah, I think so. First, I love Conan. It's great. That sword and sorcery vibe the whole movie brings and does well, which is there's so many bad fantasy movies out there. People say there's not a lot of good horror movies, people who like horror, but they're spoiled for choice. There's so many good horror movies out there. Science fiction, there's so many good science fiction movies out there. For truly good fantasy movies that are like big budget, if I dug around, maybe I could find them, but I think 10 would be a struggle. And Conan is up there in Lord of the Rings territory for me. And part of the reason for that is the seriousness with which a silly sort of premise, like a fantasy thing, is taken by these really good actors. And it's particularly James Earl Jones here is just chewing the scenery and having a ball. And he is doing such a good job in terms of his commitment here. That gets into like what I like about villains is people who have like strong beliefs, and they're not just bad for bad sake. These people think what they're doing is some variety of right? And I think that makes them more interesting and nuanced. Really, I think the sort of the difference between, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's this barbarian guy who really struggles to communicate in the film as the character, and also as early Arnold Schwarzenegger, which really vibes well with the whole film. It's perfect. But then you have Thulsa Doom here, who has these powers of speech that compel people to do things that manipulate reality, in contrast with sort of the power of steel versus the power of flesh, right? And I think those types of powers in like role-playing games is also interesting because there's no answer to the riddle, right? Like what is the way to go about changing the world when you're playing a game, or if you're a villain, right? But there's a lot of different approaches to it, and I like how they show two contrasting ways in a swords and sorcery setting.
You've touched on something that I think is absolutely critical in building proper villains for stories, whether that's in literature or film or at a table. And that's that, in a certain regard, Thulsa, the sorcerer, has brought order to a world that is fraught with chaos and peril, that here in this wasteland of anarchy and terror, he's built a civilization of logic, of reason, that's guided by rules and wonders of architecture, language, and civilization. But he's just doing it for slightly the wrong reason, and you see that poison it over an arc to where by the time Conan finds him, he, in this almost pubescent stage of rage and failure to communicate, emerges as this bizarre avatar of the world itself, pulling down this would-be future of order and light and people turning into snakes, and rips it out at the root, saying, this is not the world that you belong in anymore. Don't mess with the heart of the thing. And so it's strange that the hero in some ways is not a hero at all. He's just this wrecking ball that emerges from the mist, destroys what has been set up. No, I mean, this is not to protect Thulsa Doom. He's done a lot of really naughty things.
We're not pro Thulsa Doom here.
But you have to admit, for just 10 seconds in his own history, he's this simian semi-messianic figure who has provided safety in a world where there is no guarantee of safety, or perhaps the illusion of safety. I mean, at the expense of several virgins.
I think that's sort of interesting in what how heroes are presented, right? And why sort of the super heroic framing a lot of the times is that there's a status quo, right? And the hero exists to protect the status quo, because changes to the status quo are inherently bad. This is what villains do, right? This is not exactly the most satisfying and doesn't really fit reality and when positive change happens to, our reality either. Often the order and the status quo is the thing that is causing the negative consequences, is causing the, horrific conditions, and you need to upend that. But often, right, where the tension comes in is in the upending. And sometimes that's awful too, right? And you get something worse. Sometimes you get something better, and everything's complex and messy. We can trust people playing games and consuming media to enjoy that type of thing. And not to say simplistic stuff is bad. Again, I love some simple, good, bad, it really hits that brain in a good way, the dopamine, whichever. But it's fun to dig into the nuances sometimes as well.
If you are watching this and have the notion that you'd like to be a weird little person who may or may not be devoured by a sand squid, please be my guest, check that out, and have as much fun as I've had at our table playing the Desert Moon of Karth. But that's not the only thing you've done! You have a new project coming out, and I would love to spend just a little bit of time talking about that. It's its own thing, and a delving into a fantasy setting, and you have called it an excellent name. Shrike. Would you mind unpacking a little bit for us what it is, when we can expect it, etc., etc.?
Sure. So the Shrike is where I'm as Silverarm. I am publishing this one, so I'm not writing it, but I'm really excited about the writing in this. It's by Leo Hunt, who, as mentioned, he's done Volts of Varn, Blood Heist, a number of cool RPG stuff, and so he used to be, or it still is, a novelist as well. So that the prose in it I really enjoy, but also it's 300 pages. It's a sandbox, dark fantasy setting in this demi-plane sort of abandoned prison, which is made to impale a god on this sort of mega structure mountain of iron and stone, and this blood runs down this mega structure, and it's got all these different levels of occupants and factions and demons and sinners and strange creatures that occupy it. And the blood sort of gives new life to these strange, inanimate objects that have been sort of given this divine essence and suddenly live in this weird place. And then players stumble into it and have to deal with this place. And it really it's weird. It's awful, but it's not as awful as one would expect from a hellscape, which is a fine line to walk. And I think it's really a delightfully weird place as well. And I'm excited about it. There's over 40 different monsters, tons of new treasure, and heaps of really weird locations for players to explore.
So if you have a hankering to traverse a spire designed to have impaled a god paying for a sin no one can remember in the first place, and journey into a hellscape with some of your closest friends in a dark fantasy setting for old school essentials, the Shrike might be a fantastic place to start and stay for what seems like an interminable amount of time.
Could be a while, yeah.
And have you seen the artwork for the Shrike? It has strong... For me, it tickles that funny bone that only artists like Frazetta could do.
Yantif illustrations just knocked it out of the park. Absolutely astounding. And that sort of woodcut look really, I think, fit. Both me and Leo are very excited about the way it looks, and we want to hopefully make more money on it to buy more of his art, to put more in it in the book, because I would love to have as much as possible. It's beautiful. I want to get some of that stuff on my wall. Would recommend working with him as well. For anybody who's into RPGs, a great person to work with, makes good stuff.
Joel, thank you so much for joining us here on Mission Control at the Panic Table. It has been a treasure playing your stuff, and we look forward to everything else that Silverarm produces. It has been wonderful having you here.
Thanks. It's been great to be here, and look forward to seeing the show again in the future. Yeah, have a great day.
Adios, muchacho. Bye con Dios.
Adios.
Let's pull up the HUD on our overview of the Desert Moon of Karth for Mothership by Silverarm Press. All right, we're gonna start with size. Weighing in at 52 pages, the Desert Moon of Karth is crawling with cozy cantinas, derelict dunescapes, D100 tables, and dastardly desperados. For that, we award 3 out of 5 sand squids. Tons of dungeons to explore. Let's talk about artwork. 5 out of 5 sand squids. Just look at the amazing and imaginative detail by artists Logan Stahl, Francesco Zanieri, Glenn Seal, Ben Smith, and layout by Simeon Cogswell. And heck, let's add a bonus sand squid, because Desert Moon of Karth comes with a soundtrack. 6 out of 5 sand squids. Flexibility. Now, what do we mean by flexibility? We're talking about how easy it is to plug the events and environments of a module into your own adventure. With the Desert Moon of Karth, this module works great as a one-shot, or alternatively, to serve as the backdrop for your entire spacefaring shenanigans for weeks on end. The ease of play is high, and Joel has even written conditional timelines to set the pace if you'd like to curtail your party's stay on Karth. For that, another 5 out of 5 sand squids is awarded. Here at the Panic Table, we acknowledge that spookiness is what you and your party make of it. That said, the Desert Moon of Karth offers organ-harvesting pseudo-vampires, ghosts in the dunes, subterranean psychic sea anemones, and plain old pissed-off cowboys. The Desert Moon of Karth really shines when wardens take the time to seed in long-form dread. And for that, we rate the spookiness of the Desert Moon of Karth with 3 out of 5 sand squids. That adds up to 4.75 sand squids and makes this a Mission Control must-have. If you're into it, check out the links in the description. Thanks so much for joining us here at Mission Control. We've got more exciting publishers, artists, dreamers, and schemers lined up, so stay tuned. Like, comment, subscribe, etc. Until then, stay spooky. I'm Cameron Dangerous Street Matter, signing off.